'Tis I, Dr. Dementia! And from prosperity comes a bountiful harvest, swinging us into Dominion's 5th expansion, Cornucopia, released in June of 2011. The basic theme? You're basically creating and rewarding variety in your deck and hand. It is another small expansion like Alchemy, but it is also a popular one for its focus on engine-friendly cards. Now, there aren't any new mechanics per se, but 2 cards in the set do change things up a little bit. We'll go into them, but why don't we just get right into those cards now?
Yes, I am.
So the first card we're going to look at is a brand new victory card for the set, Fairgrounds. Costing 6 to purchase, worth 2 victory points per 5 differently named cards you have rounded down. Summing up variety quite well, and a solid upgrade from Gardens, and also a good synergizer with Gardens. We'll go into that in a moment. First, a couple of rules with the card. 8 Fairgrounds in a game with 2 players, 12 for a game with 3 or more. So, with it being worth 2 victory points for 5 differently named cards, if you have 0 to 4, it's worth 0. 5 to 9, it's worth 2. 10 to 14, worth 4. And 15 to 19, it is worth 6. Now, by default, you can only have 17 differently named cards if you got the supply piles, the treasures, the victory cards, and the curses. However, cards like Black Market, a very good synergizer in this set, because at the very least, you can have a variety of differently named cards, increasing the value of this by the end of the game. Now, there's also 2 other cards that do introduce a slightly different mechanic that also could increase the number of piles on the field, therefore increasing the number of victory points. Again, very solid and very good to work with on your Gardens as well, especially as you build up your Fairgrounds, because I would say for this cost, if you have at least multiple individual different named cards, this is a very good upgrade from buying a province. And yes, potions do count as well, keeping that in mind also. So, this is very good for its cost, very good for its potential, but it does require building up said potential. Kind of like Trade Route in a way, but I'd say the benefits outweigh the costs in this card quite a bit. Seeing as, you know, forcing yourself to buy the duchy, the estate, and a curse will outweigh the cost and the amount of victory points you can gain for this, especially if you focus very heavily on picking this up in the mid to late game, which is where this card is going to shine from, especially if you have enough cards and you've been focusing. A mid to late game card, solid upgrade, and if you can maximize its potential, much better to pick this up for 2 less than a province at 8, as well as being able to sync up very well with Gardens. I say it's one of the very fair, quote-unquote, cards that you could take advantage of this, and it's a good start to the set. Next card we're going to look at is the Farming Village. Costing 4 to purchase, plus 2 actions. Reveal cards from your deck until you reveal a treasure or action card. Put that card into your hand and discard the rest. Now, not the strongest in terms of the villages. I mean, Workers Village, a much better option in this case. However, it's not available. This one is nothing to scoff at. This is good when you have potentially started working on some deck control and really want to sift through your deck for as much of your treasures and actions as possible. This is great when you have a ton of curses or victory cards that you are getting hit with. So your curse generators, even Baron, for example, a good option to work with there, because you can use Baron's effect and still use this to go over right now. Potential good synergies to couple with this. Scrying Pool, yeah, not a bad option there, giving you a little bit more ample action, and plus 2 actions. Nothing to scoff at for this card, you just need the extra draw power to do it. There is a couple of downsides. Once you've constructed your engine pretty well, that sifting bonus is not going to provide much help. I mean, by mid-game, you might not even have a ton of victory cards or curses, and again, you are not going to be able to sift through your treasures. So, you need to make sure that if you're going to go for treasures, they need to be upgraded. You need to have a way to get rid of your coppers one way or the other in order to really make this take off. Once you have golds, this is where you can potentially start feeling through and getting those victory cards that you absolutely need. And this works well in the end game when you have potentially picked up Fairgrounds as an example, and you have all of them in your deck. You basically want to sift through. You don't need the actions. You basically just need to keep drawing into your deck. So again, this works well when you have it coupled with some good draw power, but more importantly, this works well when you have a ton of junk in your deck. So, this is more of a mid-game card, I would say. Early game would not be my first choice in the opening, but once you have a couple of extra cards that you want to get to, then that's when it wants to take off. However, be advised, again, coppers are treasures. You need to be able to get rid of those coppers if you really want to make this take off. So, best way you could really use this card, you want an action card heavy decks, relying on those to generate your coin more so than actual treasures themselves. This way, you do not have too much holding you back. Not a bad card, very interesting. Keep it in the mid game, maybe late game if your deck can amp up for it. Next on the list is a new attack card, Fortune Teller. Costing 3 to purchase, plus 2 coin for you. Each of the player reveals cards from the top of their decks until they reveal a victory card or a curse. They put it on top and discard the rest. Now, right off the bat, not bad for 3 costs when you got a terminal silver with an added bonus of an attack. If you look at it compared to Farming Village, it is almost the exact opposite. Where you're looking for treasures and actions, you're forcing your opponent to look for a victory card or a curse. Now, early on, especially for that cost, that can be potentially detrimental to their deck, because at that point, they could discard the coppers that they might need for purchases and be forced to deal with an estate. And again, in curse-heavy decks, curse generators, that might not be the best option for them unless Charlatan is in play, in which case that can potentially open up a lot more options. Now, even though that seems like that's great, it isn't a very powerful attack. So, as the game goes on, it might not be more powerful for them because they might be able to get rid of their chunk fast enough that they might not have any curses. They might not have any estates. They might be getting ready to go for those more expensive victory cards, or as the term colloquially explains it, they might begin greening their decks. And that's when it may run out of power. And at that point, if they have enough action cards, it's not going to be a super powerful card. Cards like Harbinger could stop this card in its tracks, and it really is only beneficial if you're playing multiple of these, which I don't recommend because you don't get much out of it besides a silver. It is the same cost as the silver. I would choose this in your opening hand rather than a regular silver because you get the same exact thing with a little bit of an added effect. But as the game, carries on, not really. It will benefit from plus action heavy decks, so a good draw 2 engine, usually good. Not strong enough though for some better cards, but it's good to work with, and honestly, it will have its uses better than Rabble. Multiple copies of Fortune Teller may not work as great than multiple copies of Rabble. Early game card, early mid game card. After that, consider some better options. I would trash for benefit, upgrade it a little bit better, because it might run out of steam sooner or later. Still, a decent attack for its cost. It's good for its early effects. Not bad. Next card we're going to look at is Hamlet. Costing 2 to purchase, plus 1 card, plus 1 action. You may discard a card for plus 1 action. You may also discard a card for plus 1 buy. You can use both of those effects combined. So, right off the bat, 2 costs for a plus 1 card, plus 1 action cantrip. Not bad. I like the cost. It's very useful. And in the early game, great for discarding estates to give you a little bit more firepower. Now, when Hamlet's the only card in your deck, in terms of actions, you're very limited. So, not going to be really good there. Its overall strength is going to come from the fact that you need a maximum amount of draw power being able to overdraw into your deck. So, a few examples there. We're looking at Library, we're looking at Smithy, we're looking at Watchtower, and Tactician, just to give you as many cards as you need. Now, Library works better when Hamlet is already in your hand. Now, still, nothing to scoff at, getting rid of some coppers, getting rid of some victory point cards takes advantage of that pretty well. This is also great at the point when you are also building up with Magnate as another potential synergy when you have plenty of treasure in your hand. Big draw, overdraw, and big treasure. Very good in all of those aspects. Again, it needs a little bit of buildup. You need the discarding power in order to take advantage of it, so you do need to afford to have some junk in your deck to fully maximize its power. So Warehouse, not a good option when you already have to discard. So if you're building up on victory point cards, very good to work with at this case, and it will have a maximum potential. Again, you need the draw power in order to take advantage of it, but for that 2 cost, not bad. I would not say I could say early game, but not on your opening hand. You need a few more actions to fully take advantage of this card because you want to be able to play as many actions as possible. Mid game, absolutely. And in the late game, when you have the engine built up, this is good to just fit this in here, and it works out perfectly. And hey, Great Halls. This is a much better improvement than that, but you could still put it in there if you want to. Oh, not bad. It gives you an ability to kind of sift through everything, so very good card. Moving right along, we have Harvest. Costing 5 the purchase, reveal the top 4 cards of your deck, then discard them, plus 1 coin per differently named card revealed. Now, that, right off the bat, does not sound great. First off, it's a 5-cost card, so it's already expensive at that point, and there's a higher opportunity cost. This is also more useful when you have a deck of differently named cards, so you are not specifically focusing on one card in the supply. Much better in an option where there are not many synergy-heavy cards that you can take advantage of. Wall Village being a good example to really work well in this deck, but that being said, let's say, for example, you drew into golds and platinums, not to mention a powerful action card like King's Court. Do you really want them discarded? No. I could see this being potentially useful if you are playing Possession, because then you can possess your opponent to purchase the Harvest and continue to possess them in order for them to lose out on maximum synergy with this card. It instantly becomes a dead card to them because they may not want to draw into it. The only circumstance I see this working well is in curse heavy and victory point heavy decks. So if you have a lot of greening, then yeah, but you need different cards still. That's the problem with this card. You need to have very unique cards, and that gives you a very expensive, unreliable, and largely a very low impact card that isn't going to do much for you in the late game. Because of its cost too, it's mid-game only, but again, you need to have some uniqueness in your set. I mean, with some of the cards in this set, you can take advantage of that, and again, with Wall Village being another example, you could, but when you start picking up more expensive cards, you're looking for a transfer benefit on this. And to be honest, Expand is a very good one to pull off on this, to turn this into a province, because then you have a little bit more. Again, the Possession idea is an example where this can work well against your opponent, but that's really about it. I don't see a lot of uses for it. It could have had more potential. It basically, differently being the key word here in this card is what made this card a little bit more weaker than that. Next up, we have a brand new treasure card we're going to look at. Horn of Plenty. Costing 5 the purchase. Gain a card costing up to 1 coin per differently named card you have in play, counting miss. If it's a victory card, you trash it. Fun little trivia. I did talk about some treasure cards in the Prosperity Update Pack that did not generate coin. However, in terms of dates, this card is the very first one that does not produce coin right off the bat. Now, this has potential in super heavy variety decks. You basically will be creating a deck built solely around the Horn of Plenty to do one thing, and that's basically end the game. And the way it's going to work is this. You want to build basically overdrawing, overdecking mega turns that allow you to constantly draw into these Horn of Plenties to be able to purchase provinces at the very least, or colonies if you are fortunate enough to have that many unique victory cards to do action cards to do it. The treasures do count as unique cards, so that works well. You can play this off of duration cards also, that also counts. As long as they stay on the field, that's fine. The moment you pick up that province or colony, it gets trashed. Now, there are more than enough if you're playing against two people, against one other person, to be able to afford to get rid of all of the provinces, but at that point, you're probably also purchasing them as well. This is good when you are also heavily greening into your deck and you're able to sift through it. So, Hamlet, a good option there because you basically will be able to get through it quick enough. Farming Village is also good to sift through into these Horn of Plenties. Basically, any duration card that helps you draw as well. Tactician is going to be one of your strongest suits. You basically need all of the power and potential to be able to play through cards non-stop. You want both Market and Grand Market. You basically want Fishing Village, Lighthouse, Wharf. You want the potential draws of Watchtower, Library as well. Workers' Village to be able to draw through it as much as possible. You could even pull this off with an outpost, no questions asked. There's a lot of choices. The kingdom needs to offer 2 main ingredients to make a strategy of being able to use Horn of Plenty to gain all 8 provinces possible. You need 8 unique cards that you can get into play and sufficient deck control to reliably draw and play into the large number of cards possible. And getting into these, if your action cards are generating currency too, it makes it so that you can draw into these a lot faster. You basically want to thin out your deck of the unnecessary trash once you have the successful number of cards you need. You could use Tiara to couple with the Horn of Plenty to be able to play it twice. My opinion on this card is that it is very good for what it does. It has one specific target use, and it does it quite well at that point. Now, when to purchase it? You could definitely consider getting this early, because you could pick up some very cheap action cost cards that are going to give you cantrip draw or just massive draw when you need it. Mid game is where you're going to want to start picking these up when you have the necessary deck to do this. If you don't have these by the late game, you're going to lose out on potentially getting as many of the provinces as possible. You lose it after it's trashed, but consider a theory. Lurker. You could regain it immediately after using it on your next turn. If you don't have very powerful cards that are going to be able to draw into this, stay away from it. You can still use it for action cards, but that's about it. I would limit yourself at that point. This is also good for just clearing out piles if you need to as well, but that's secondary compared to greening the deck to submission. Fun card. Take advantage of it if you can. Next up, we're going to look at a new action-reaction card, and that's Horse Traders. Costing 4 to purchase. The action, +1 buy, +3 coin, but you discard 2 cards. The reaction effect, when another player plays an attack card, you may first set this aside from your hand. If you do, then at the start of your next turn, +1 card, and return this into your hand. Now, looking at the upside here at costing 4 to purchase, +3 coin and a buy. Nothing to scoff at. Always good to have an extra buy, but discarding 2 cards, that's a bit of an ouchie there, because that really forces you to consider playing this card near the very end unless you had a massive amount of treasures in your hand. Now, this is more beneficial if you are reliant on action-heavy decks and your coin is being generated from your action cards, and then you could probably use to discard 2 cards on some trash victory, or even junk cards at that particular point to really fully maximize this. Because even at +3 coin, discarding 2 coppers, you're still getting a mild benefit out of it. But that's about it. It is still very weak in terms of a payload, and considering this is a last resort, I would say this is being played near the end of your turns rather than at the very beginning, because it will screw you relatively quickly. Now, looking at that reaction, it's great to a degree, but there are cards that can give you a much better draw, such as the duration cards from Seaside, that makes this not really that fantastic. Not bad, and the fact that the reaction can be played on any attack card, it's useful. You could do early to mid game on this card. Again, I would limit myself a little bit here, because once you start purchasing golds by itself, then the potential of this really dwindles on only being a plus buy. You could probably do better with other cards that can give you a buy without such a detrimental effect. Again, having it in your hand for the reaction can be somewhat useful, but if you have some very strong action cards, you have to be very careful on playing this, and really should be played at the end of your turn. It's a kind of card. It's compared to a lot of the other reactions, it's not great. Next up, we have Hunting Party. Costing 5 to purchase, +1 card, +1 action. Reveal your hand. Reveal cards from your deck until you reveal one that isn't a copy of one in your hand. Put it into your hand and discard the rest. This is basically a cantrip with a synergy starter in terms of overall effectiveness here, and it's a very powerful one that digs for cards that basically you don't have in your hand. And at its best, basically it can give you the best cards and get rid of any unnecessary junk that you don't need in your trunk. The cycling part greatly differs than a lot of other cards we looked at. It's a little bit more unique than how Scrying Pool works out, but the two of them can complement each other quite well. And again, the more you play some unique cards, the better you're going to be able to really take advantage of this. Now, this is more of an excellent use when You basically are playing with very weak or limited thinning, so your trash for benefit effects are down the drain, or trashing in general is very limited, and this will give you the ability to kind of sift through this a lot quicker. Play order is very important with this. You want this to be one of the first cards you play with if you can. If not, second or third, just so that you have a lot of uniqueness, but not enough that it's going to stop you on your first or second reveal. This is great again when you have unique action cards on the field, so something along the lines of very limited on draw, or very limited on action generation here, because again, a +1 card, +1 action cantrip gets you through your next victory card for your next action card without having to consider that option. It is a synergy starter. It can work well with a lot of engines, and for example, if you don't have any type of village in your hand at the start, Hunting Party is probably going to help you find it. So much so like Scrying Pool as well, but Scrying Pool also gives you the extra actions too. So again, those two complement each other very well, and again, it's a good way to start off your hands. And if you really want to consistently play attack cards, sort of like Militia or even Goons for example, this is a good way to keep drawing into this every single turn. Cost makes it very hard to pick it up on the opening, and I wouldn't recommend it in the early game. Mid game is when you're going to really make this card shine, when you have variety. And if you're not focusing heavily on one specific card over the other, then this is really going to knock it out of the ballpark. Again, you're looking at very limited trashing, very limited thinning, and basically your action cards are doing the work for you. Just be wary. You're probably going to want to be more unique and hold off on purchasing any victory cards if you're running Hunting Party toward the mid to the late game. At that point, then Hunting Party becomes a little more useless. Still, in terms of sifting and scrying through your deck, very good. I like its potential. And the next card is one of the first of two curse generators for the set. First one being Jester. Costing 5 to purchase, +2 coin. Each of the player discards the top card of their deck. If it's a victory card, they gain a curse. Otherwise, they gain a copy of the discarded card, or you do. Your choice. Now, it is a gainer and a junker on the face of it. It's unreliable and can be absurdly random. However, when it does hit, it can hit very big. Let's look at the obvious fact. First off, if you somehow got this in the early game, you could basically fill up their decks with curses if they pull into the estates, or more coppers sitting out when they could potentially get into much more powerful cards. So getting too many coppers can flood their deck and make it a little less viable to pull off synergies without having them have to trash the cards. Now, what is also great is if you happen to reveal a curse, then they can get another curse. They're basically stacking up the curses once the first one hits the deck. Less of a big deal if Charlatan is in play, but other than that, always good to flood the deck. And that's basically its goal. You are flooding. On its attack, you basically want to flood it as much as possible. That's the junker part of the card. The gainer part is especially useful when you want very strong cards like Grand Market with King's Court, Workers' Village as examples, or potentially any of the alchemy-based cards requiring a potion to purchase, thereby skipping that part. So Scrying Pool, a very good example. Maybe even Golem, definitely a possession. You never know. It's because of its unpredictability that the gains can be limited. You basically have to build around that, and you have to hope that they're going to have a very good card. If there's a lot of powerful trash for benefit, or just thinning in general, then this is going to lose strength very quickly. And at 5 costs for a +2 coin, at that point, it's not going to be great. If they're able to just trash out all the curses and basically all the crap, you're only looking at being potentially able to gain something decently useful. And if that's what the case is going to be, you're better off flooding your deck, your opponent's deck, more than your deck. So it's going to lose its potency after a while, and you're going to want to maybe trash this for something a little bit better. And if Expand is available, then going right into a province is nothing to scoff at there. Its cost, hard to accomplish early on, but if you got it on the 5-2 split, might not be a bad option, because if you got an estate, the curses are going to hit hard, and if you got a copper, flooding it with another copper isn't going to be great. It will lose steam, and if they're somehow able to thin out the deck quick enough before it loses a lot of its potency, then you're looking at potentially gaining a few extra cards that you might be able to take advantage of that your opponent got. After that, trashing the card is probably going to be your last option. You can get it on the early game just to get set up for it, but it's definitely an early mid-game card. Still a decent one if you can get the right cards to pull. Luck is the key, and that's the main thing. Next up, we're going to look at Menagerie. Costing 3 to purchase, plus 1 action. Reveal your hand. If the reveal cards all have different names, plus 3 cards. Otherwise, plus 1 card. Now, at the very worst, this can turn into a simple cantrip. At the very most, this could turn into one of the more potential powerful cards of the set. You do need to reliably activate Menagerie in order to fully take advantage of it, and you need variety in your deck. Nothing to scoff at when you can use potential cards such as King's Court to help increase the number of times you play these cards, as well as Throne Room also. So Grand Markets, Laboratories, Workers Village, outstanding examples there. Being able to heavily draw into your deck, so Library and Watchtower also, Smithies as well. You have a few different ways to reliably activate Menagerie, especially in powerful decks. One way is to reduce your hand size and then activate Menagerie afterwards. So if you want to just simply continually play cards, you can also work on basically discarding the offending duplicates you have in your hand if you have optional extra cards in there, and then thinning and trashing out some cards. Now, when I say variety, especially in the case of Walled Village and a lot of the cards in this set, you don't have to stick with just having one of them. Its viability is more powerful when you have more unique cards. So, this kind of helps out set the tone for a lot of your decks, and to maximize it, you can have more than one. You just want to make sure that you have at least one unique one for each card you play. So if you had two Grand Markets in your hand, play one first, then play the Menagerie. And this also counts for your treasures and your victory cards as well. So sending out those copies of the estates become a big priority. So you don't want to immediately purchase this because it becomes an immediate hindrance in the very opening hands, because those copies and estates will stop you. And while it is dependent on the duplicates, it's more broadly tied to how many duplicate cards are in your deck, because if you try to play this more than once and you keep drawing into duplicates, then it's going to lose its potency. So I wouldn't Throne Room or King's Court this card just off that basis. You're better off saving that for a Grand Market or even a Smithy or a Laboratory as well. This is more beneficial in the late early game into the early mid game. One of the biggest heavy things you want to consider is that you want your coin to come from your action cards and not from the treasures themselves, unless you have a gold in there or even a silver and an astrolabe too. Black Market is another one to follow up on, because at the very least you can get as much variety as possible, thereby maximizing Menagerie's effect. A very good card overall. Next card we're going to take a look at is a transfer benefited card that's more unique compared to the others we've looked at before, and that's Remake. Costing 4 to purchase. Do this twice. Trash a card from your hand, then gain a card costing exactly 1 more from it. Now, kind of a heavy stipulation here, but it can be a very strong transfer benefit card that is very potential depending on when you play it. And let's look at a couple of examples. First off, let's look at this if we had this in the early game, especially on your opening hand of our 4-3 split. This is a good way to get rid of both your estates and instantly turn them into silvers, or at least get one with an astrolabe. Very powerful. You could also basically target one estate, trash it for something that costs 3, and then trash it again to get an action card costing up to 4. It is basically more powerful enough to thin out your deck, and if you have the 3 cost cards for actions, this is good to use. Otherwise, getting them into silvers are good. Either way, it builds up some money early on, and at that point you can focus heavily on your coppers to see if you can make those into estates and then turn those into other silvers or more powerful. Again, it takes a little bit to work with, and it takes a while to at least make it a little bit stronger. When you look at this in terms of the end game, it is a little bit more distinct from the other ones. It can't be used to mill provinces, for example, and you can't transform other cards into provinces unless one of the 7 cost cards were available, and you're looking more in the prosperity line for that. But getting 2 cards at the same time can provide a lot more control on your deck and can start forcing pile-outs, basically making the game end a little bit quicker. Now, that mandatory 2 trashing and gaining a card costing exactly one more than it is a lot less flexible. And let's look at it this way. Beyond the early game, it can be inconvenient, and if your deck is thin, you might not want to do it. Now, that being said, cost reduction cards such as Bridge is useful in this case because you could basically have junk costed 0 to remake, but it could turn into more useful cards if the cost was reduced by it. But you would need to potentially make Bridge a lot more powerful to really be able to make this card shine. That would be one of the few ways I could see getting cards that would become provinces for you. So that is a more distinct possibility. Overall, though, it is not a bad card, and because of the stipulation, it is good either in the early game or the late game. In mid-game, you're still kind of building out and setting the synergy you need, and once your deck reaches a certain level of control, and it's thinned out to the point that you don't really want to use it, remake itself. If you have more than one remake, just remake that. But you're going to be looking at more solid trashes, and this becomes a little bit more fodder in your hand. Overall, it is a unique card and can have a lot of potential use. The timing is everything with this card, though. Still not bad. Next up, we're going to discuss a card from this set that actually is one of the two main mechanics of the set because of the way it works, and it's going to require a lot of explanation on its effect in specific parts. The card I'm talking about is Tournament, costing 4 to purchase, +1 action. Each player may reveal a province from their hand. If you do, discard it and gain any prize from the prize pile or a duchy onto your deck. If no one else does, +1 card and +1 coin. Now, that part about the prize pile I will discuss in a few moments. I want to go into the card in a little bit more detail about its more general effect before going into that, because that's going to require some additional explanation. +1 action on a 4 cost is nothing to scoff at, especially on the early game when you can get this on a 4-3 split. And being able to take advantage of it because no one's going to have a promise at that point means this turns into a cheaper version of a peddler. It's not bad. I mean, there are more stronger cards out there that you could do to gain this rather than that. Its overall strength is going to come from having this with a province in your hand. So the key here is being able to have the two collide. So if you have one or the other in your hand, you're going to want something like Harbinger being able to play to easily get this in here. You could also scry into it heavily. So Farming Village, just thinning out for the tournament is a good one. Though you would have to make sure that province is in your hand because the other way around makes it utter trash. But Scrying Pool makes it a little bit easier to work with. This can lose its strength if your opponent starts getting the provinces before you do. So the priority is to be able to do that. With that in mind, it's not a bad card for its cost when you look at what else it can do. And now I'm going to discuss that next part. The prize pile is a separate set of 5 cards. These 5 cards are each individual cards costing 0 and actually have the subtype prize in them. There are only 5 of them, so once all 5 disappear, you can only get duchies, which is not a bad way to get duchies, especially if Duke is in play. It's a good way to be able to pick this up, especially with extra buys. We're keeping that in mind for the synergy there. Now we're going to go into each of those prize cards, and then I will basically go over its usefulness and coinciding with Tournament. Overall, basically what's good to pick up first and last. First prize we're going to look at is Bag of Gold. +1 action, you gain a gold onto your deck. It's one of the weaker prizes, but it can be useful for good trash for benefit effects such as Expand, Mine, Forge, all of those. Just giving you an instant gold, sort of like Bandit. Good in heavy money gain decks. It's overall very useful in that particular card, but that was really the only use for it. But having the extra action means you can go into it. If you have somehow the ability to draw into the gold after playing it, it's great. Could I potentially Throne Room or King's Court this? Yes, I would, just for having a couple of extra golds. It actually makes it more viable than trying to go for the treasure map route, but you have to get to the Bag of Gold first before you can get it. Other than that, not really great unless you overdraw, so Tactician decks really work well with this. Not many other uses besides that for this particular card. Second prize is Diadem. A new treasure generates 2 coin plus 1 coin per unused action you have. Action, not action card. Need to be a little specific than that. Action heavy decks are the keys with this, so a lot of villagers and basically that's it. If you can play into a lot of villages and generate enough action cards, you will basically turn this from a 2 to potentially an 8, 9, or 10. So this is good in extra buys as well. So Workers Village is the big one you really want to go with here. King's Courting this makes this very powerful, and using Tiara on Diadem is nothing to scoff at either, because if you have enough buys, you're basically walking away with 2 colonies at the very minimum. It can be very useful in that sense. Next prize on the list is Followers. +2 cards gain an estate. Each other player gains a curse and discards down to 3 cards in hand. This is very powerful. Basically a curse generator with a militia effect all in one. Not to mention giving you some decent draw power. However, the one downside is that you yourself gain estates. Now, that's nothing to scoff at. You could basically trash the estate for something strong, but that also means the curse can get trashed as well. So, while you might not want to play this as often as possible, you could potentially King's Court this to draw into a very heavy deck and use this for discard fodder, giving you a very good chance. Plus, you'll also thin out the estates piles this way and give you some extra point coverage. But to really take advantage of this card, you really need some overdraw, and that's the main key with this. Other than that, overall, a good attack that you should do at least a couple of times if you can pick this card up. Next of the 5 prizes is Princess. +1 buy this turn. Cards cost 2 less. This is a solid upgrade from Bridge. Basically doubling how much it costs. And let's look at it this way. You could King's Court or Throne Room Princess, and this turns into one of the most disgusting cards you could ever play with, potentially giving you so many buys. You could reduce the cost of province so much, you could basically pick up at least 3 to 4 provinces in one turn. But please, I mean, it's not like I had any footage of that actually taking place, but you never know. Overall, this is a very good card, and this works well with your trash for benefit cards also, so all of these are good. You can also stack this with Bridge if you so desire, so have fun with it. And the final prize is Trusty Steed. Choose 2, +2 cards, or +2 actions, or +2 coin, or gain 4 silvers and put your deck into your discard pile. The choices must be different. A lot of versatility because it basically can provide some actions, some cards, some coin, or some more coin, or basically just putting your deck into your discard pile. The main thing on this is a lot of flexibility. So, Throne Rooming this card, or even King's Courting this card, you can basically get a lot of power out of this. And if for some reason you have this early on, you could gain the silvers and basically use them for trash for benefit effect fodder. But other than that, I wouldn't really take advantage of the 4 silvers twice. I would definitely take advantage of the deck into discard pile if you've already thinned out most of your deck and you want to draw it into some better cards. There's some flexibility in this card, and I like it. With all the prizes listed now, let's go into this in terms of which ones are probably the best ones to go with. First off, I think Followers is probably the best one to start with because of its strong hand size attack as well as the curse generation. Always good. Trusty Steed gives you that flexibility, which is useful depending on what cards are in your hand and what you want to play to synergize with your deck, so versatility is the key with that one. Princess, good for the payload and basically the cost reduction, stacking pretty well with Bridge, and overall giving you the potential of buying out so much victory cards you don't know what to do with. Diadem requires building up the deck on action and draw power, so as long as you can do that, you're set. But other than that, it's really a specific circumstance. And Bag of Gold, while gaining a gold and basically good for trash and benefit like Bandit, it's basically money heavy gain specific for this card. Overall, these 5 prizes compiled with Tournament makes it for one of the most chaotic cards you could ever come up with. I'd say a little bit more than Black Market, but overall this is a very good set of cards to work with, and Tournament is reliable for being one of the first cards you should pick up if you really want to try to shoot for any of these prizes. If you happen to get all 5 of them, go nuts, but I would limit myself to at least 1 or 2 prizes, depending on the way your deck is being built. Again, you want to look at these prizes in particular to see what's going to work for you, and if you're building toward those prizes, it's great. Though, again, something like Trusty Steed or Princess is more viable because they can be flexible with anything. The choice is yours, but overall, tournament and the prizes, they're fun cards to play with. I love them a lot. And the final card we're going to look at for Cornucopia is the second curse generator, and one that adds a brand new mechanic, the second of the 2 mechanics for this set, and that is Young Witch. Costing 4 to purchase, plus 2 cards. Discard 2 cards. Each other player gains a curse unless they reveal a Bane from their hand. The setup requires adding an extra Kingdom card pile, costing 2 to 3 to the supply. Its cards become the Bane subtype. Now, let me go into a couple of things with this card before we get started. So first off, the Bane card pile is basically any card you decide you want to play with at random that costs either 2 or 3, not part of the ones that you have already chosen, so you could use a randomizer, you could just select it personally. It goes on this Bane marker here. Now, if Black Market is in play and the Young Witch is in there, the Bane pile gets set up automatically, and again, this is where there is an extra supply pile, which means Fairgrounds gains an added benefit as a result of it. This also means, because it is an actual pile, it also counts toward the end game condition of clearing piles. Other than that, it's basically whatever action card you decide to play with. With those rules explained, let's talk about this card from a couple of different perspectives. First off, the plus 2 cards, good for that draw power, nothing to scoff at. I mean, it is now comparable somewhat to a warehouse in terms of the discard. You are discarding 2 cards for 2 cards, but good for sifting nonetheless. So I could see Throne Room being used to really sift through a lot of your junk in your deck. Curse Generation as an added bonus, not bad. It does delve down to having whatever card is the Bane at this point, and if it's really useful. Though, funny story, if you use Trade Route and the Bane pile is a victory card, that gains a coin token. So at most, Trade Route could have +9. Fun little tidbit as well. But another useful thing is you could respond with reaction cards before revealing the Bane card, which is pretty nice. So you can get some added extra power into that. But from that aside, and from that being a junking attack, it's light sifting with some synergies and cards you want to discard. The curse generation is not super strong, but if the curses are difficult to trash, then it's great. It's even better if the Bane card is a very useful card to pick up or not, because at that point, your opponent will then have to immediately decide if they need the Bane. If it's a weak card that might screw with their synergy, they may not want to pick it up, and they may have to force themselves to gain the curse. They also need to make sure they generate getting that Bane card into their hand constantly. So it's overall not bad. It's a fun card. In terms of getting this card, I would say in the early game, because at that point, if the card that has been chosen as the Bane is not super strong, they might not have picked it up yet. Which means that you could probably get some of those curses out very quickly. Again, this falls out of place if the curse generation is overpowered by powerful trashing. So then it basically will turn into a +2 cards, discard 2 cards, which is okay, I guess. But Warehouse might be a better option to fall off on if that was the case. Not a bad card. Could use it. It really depends on what you choose on the Bane. And again, it doesn't have to be random. You can choose the Bane voluntarily, and everybody could be hunky-dory with it. Not a bad card. And with that, we've come to the end of Cornucopia. This was a fun set overall. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and some of these cards are very useful. Again, there's a lot of variety, and it can potentially set up with a lot of synergy. And with that out of the way, we will move on to Dominion 6 expansion, Hinterlands. And as you remember from the last video, it did have a version 2.0 update pack. We'll do the next video on the version 1.0 cards before we delve into those update pack version 2.0 cards. So the fun is going to get started now. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, comment, and if you want to see more of this, hit that subscribe button. Every like, every comment, and every subscriber helps out the channel so much. You can also check out my Twitter for updates, as well as my Twitch for streams, and you'll see that I have now set up daily videos of my 2 fluffy cats who have now become my social media managers, Figaro and Sabrina. You'll see more of that as the channel develops more. Thank you again, guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.